Hey everybody, welcome back to another great episode of Catholic Laughter. We're not just a podcast,
We're a Godcast.
and I'm Carl Kozlowski.
And I'm Scott VInci. And Carl, let me ask you this. How was your week? Did you have a good week?
Oh, I've had a good week, but I'm kind of worried about this Saturday, man.
What's going on this Saturday?
Well, my dad has kind of lured me into going to his all-day Latin Mass retreat. And nothing wrong with the Latin Mass. We know plenty of you guys love it, but not in my cup of tea. I'm a regular English Mass kind of a guy personally. But yeah, he talked me into this a year ago. And basically, he told me, "Hey, Carl, do you want to go on a retreat with me? And it'll be on Saturday." And my dad had been sick that fall. So I thought, this will be a nice thing to do for him. Let's bond, right?
Right.
Well, he doesn't bother telling me till we get there, a half hour away from home, so I couldn't escape, that it was an all day silent retreat. Silent. Like nobody could say a word. And it's already weird because the Latin Mass, they say it, the priest talks and says the mass in silence, and you have to follow a book, which is why I get confused with it. And in here, imagine there's not just an hour of mass, it's 8 hours that I'm going to be stuck there, and I couldn't even talk at lunchtime. I mean, could you handle that, Scott?
I don't think I could, Carl, but I think maybe this is your dad's way of saying, "Hey, Carl, you talk too much. I, I want to bring you with me, and maybe we can get you just to be quiet for just maybe a day." I think that's what he was doing. What do you think?
Yeah, possibly. It definitely felt like punishment for this. I was sure, but
By the way, I grew up in Texas. Our Latin Mass was in Spanish, so that's how that works.
that's Latino Mass. That's not Latin Mass,
Oh,
Scott.
I forgot. I forgot the
Just
O.
bringing a little clarity to the scene.
Okay.
But the thing was that during lunch, I had to stare into space. Couldn't share anything about what I was learning. The priest gave like 3 talks in English, thank God, breaking up the 5 hours, other hours of silence.
This sounds like
But
my whole high school experience, by the way.
you mean like no girls would talk to you, so you sit in silence?
Yeah, well, that too. But just
Or
just
no friends?
sitting in silence and not understanding what was being said to me from the teachers. That's what I
I
was.
gotcha. Yeah. But the thing was that on top of it all, he mumbled his speeches, all 3 of his speeches that went on for an hour. And it's like he was mumbling as low as if you're whispering in confession. It was like, "And so the good Lord is teaching us how to do this." And we're sitting, my dad is hard of hearing to begin with. And the thing was that he asked me to sit in the front row with him so that he could hear better. But
Mhm.
it was so bad, he still couldn't hear it. And so
Wow.
I'm on my knees during the times he's not talking,
Mhm.
breaking my knees. It absolutely was the worst pain of my life for at least 5 hours of that day. And so then the thing was, we could barely hear the priest.
Mhm.
And I used to be narcoleptic. I fell asleep, and we're in the front row, and my dad fell asleep, and we each snored so loud that we jolted the other awake at the same time. And
Wow.
then yeah, then he started laughing, and that's not a good look when you're like in the front of the church and about 10 feet away from the priest who's staring at us
Yeah.
like it's judgment day. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I thought I would never go back, but I figured, I should. When my dad asked me again, I thought, "Hey, look, God gave us this podcast, and maybe that's a good way to say thanks." But
Yeah. Well,
let's just hope it goes better.
maybe this time just sit in the back row so you can get that nap in.
Yeah,
All right,
yeah.
Carl. Well, let's move on. Why don't we go to the first thing? You know what's coming up, don't you, Carl?
Oh, I think it's time to talk about the wacky saints in
Saints Corner.
So, yeah, who's the saint this week, Scott?
Well, this week's Saint Carl is Saint Cornelius. He is let me look at my notes here. He's the patron saint of earaches, epilepsy, fever, twitching, and he's also of cattle, domestic animals, and in the town of I think it's called
Cornel Munster.
Cornelie Munster. Is that
Oh, that's right.
It looks like Cornelie Munster, Germany. His head is there enshrined. Now, I don't know what that shrine looks like, how his head is. Maybe it's boxed in. I hope it's not plexiglass, because no one needs to see that.
That's what I'm fearing. Yeah.
So tell me, what do you think of this? First of all, Saint Cornelius. I feel like they gave him a lot of stuff, like I think there's not enough saints, but there's so many afflictions that they've got to divvy them up between the saints,
Yeah. I mean, I just wonder how they went from earaches and epilepsy to going, oh yeah, you're the patron saint of cattle. I mean, what is going on there? Were they drinking a little too much of the holy wine when they were making these decisions?
Yeah, maybe that's what happened. I have no idea how we got from cattle. Maybe the cattle had earaches. Maybe the cattle had earaches and they just combined them. I don't know.
Yeah, well, the thing is that I want to know. It's bad enough that he had earaches, but did they have to cut off his head to make them go away? I mean, come on.
I know that seems a little extreme. But I also think it's funny if there should be a sign outside in Germany that says Cornelie Munster, Germany, home of beer, bratwurst, and Saint Cornelius. Well, at least part of them.
Yeah, well, if you're on vacation, you could say you're getting a head start when you go to Cornelie Munster. But yeah, the thing is, I'm thinking I'll have to go there because I'm trying to plan a European vacation for the first time since high school. Or actually, I went when I was 20 to Poland for a summer. That was amazing. But the thing is that I'm trying to plan where to go, and now this kind of got me intrigued. I want to go there just to see the head.
I think you should have Carl's All Saints tour and just find where every saint has been or is buried, and you just go visit them.
That could actually be good, but I'm figuring what's more interesting, seeing Berlin or checking out a guy's head enshrined with the chance that looking at it will create miracles.
And have a beer while you're there.
That's right, in honor of Saint Cornelius.
Saint Cornelius.
Saint's Corner.
All right, yeah. What do you say we get on to the meat of the show? Our first guest on this show.
Only guest.
Yeah, our only guest on this show. Yeah. I'll tell you. So let's see. I wrote down an intro and I can't find it. Here we go. Carl, I was unable to be in the interview, but Carl was there, you guys. So our first guest, he's had 2 HBO specials. He's had his own HBO sitcom called Crashing, and now he has his first Netflix special called I Am Not For Everyone. You guys, please welcome Carl interviewing Pete Holmes.
Hey, Pete. How you doing? Thanks for coming out to our show, Catholic Laughter, and being one of our first guests. Big thrill to have you on. So I'm excited to know that you're back on tour, and You're going to be doing a show or 2 shows at the Chicago Den Theater, December 8th and 9th, and you're promoting your awesome new Netflix special, I Am Not For Everyone, and highly recommend that.
Thank you, my friend.
Yeah. So, I guess, here on the show, we're going to talk, obviously a lot about your career, but also some, dip into some of the spiritual issues that you're quite well known for. Your awesome book, Comedy, Sex, God. For all the Catholics who might freak out hearing that, it's comedy, sex, God. And it's actually a pretty brilliant book that's both funny and very deep about all things holy. So,
thanks, man. Thank you.
Yeah. So I guess you must be pretty excited to be back in Chicago because you got your start there about 20 years ago, right?
That's right. My goodness. It's a great comedy town. It sort of reminds me of Boston in the way that it's very, I don't know if it's the winters or something, but people are pretty discerning. They want it fast, and they want it good, and they want it loud. So it's always a great place to go and see if you're actually funny or if you've been deluding yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So, then are you riffing about a whole bunch of new stuff, I imagine? Or is some of the highlights of the special?
No, it's a new hour. This tour is a new hour, which came together very quickly. There's stuff about being a dad, being a husband, getting older. It's pretty relatable, and I hope. And
Yeah.
there's always, as you know, a little bit about faith and God and that sort of stuff, which I always enjoy delving into as well.
Yeah, that's great. But I guess, since we're talking about Chicago and I mentioned you started there 20 years ago, there's a great book. We're both in it in various parts, but mine isn't as positive as yours. I was a little bit of a
Oh
villain,
no,
unfortunately.
you
But
were?
well, I don't know if you saw it. I had a competing festival with a bigger Chicago comedy festival, and so half the people hated me and half loved me. There's a chapter about it. But the book, Perfect Kind of Wrong, is about the Chicago alt comedy scene from the mid '90s through the mid 2000s, and you're a really big part of it. You actually wrote the foreword, and it details how you wound up in Chicago, starting out doing comedy. How do you? Can you share some of that with our listeners, viewers?
Yeah, of course. I moved to Chicago to do improv. I was doing improv in college, and I had done stand-up, I think maybe probably like 6 times, maybe in
Wow.
Boston. Yeah, and I moved to an improv city. I read Truth in Comedy, which is Sharna Halpern's book about improv and kind of the Chicago way of learning improv. And I was very excited to go to an improv city. And then I found, I wouldn't say it was like dishearteningly brutal or anything, but I
Yeah.
realized when I got there, every single college improv star, at their own campus, had the exact same idea as me, which was move to Chicago, get into Second City, get onto Saturday Night Live. And that was my plan, and that was apparently everyone's plan, because every audition I went to, it was just a bunch of dudes that looked like me trying for like 300 people trying for the same one slot
Yeah.
at the school at Second City. I was auditioning just to study at Second City. I had a terrible audition. I couldn't get on a team at IO. I was doing the classes, which I enjoyed, but I couldn't get on a team. And then every day on my way to the L train to go to my job at Bennigan's in the Loop, I walked by this place called the Lion's Den, and it just said Monday comedy. That's all it said. It didn't say open mic. It didn't say stand up. It just said Monday comedy. And it was this very fortuitous placement that I happened to walk by this thing every single day. Never went in, never went to it, until finally one Monday I went just to watch, which is always my advice to young stand-ups. I'm like, just go to an open mic and watch, because that was very helpful to me. Because you see, it's not as scary as you think it is. It's just a bunch of people trying something out. And I went in and was heartened. I was like, this looks fun. This looks doable. If I'm being honest, like, a lot of the people were so new at it, it made me less scared to try it. So the next Monday I went and I signed up. And, little did I know, like, the people that were at that open mic were some like local greats, like Robert Buscemi I met the first week. Kumail Nanjiani was there. Kumail and I met at the Cubby Bear, which was the Tuesday night open mic. TJ Miller, Hannibal Burris, just some really incredible people. Matt Bronger, John Roy. I'm sure I'm forgetting some names, but like this open mic had some heat to it.
Yeah.
Which was really interesting. It's sort of like, I don't mean to put Chicago down, and I'm not, but like, because there wasn't anything there in terms of like television or movies, everybody that was doing it was just trying to be really good at stand-up. And there was a purity to that scene that I think really helped things. We were really trying to impress one another. And as a result, I think the comics there got really, really strong, really, really fast.
Yeah, that's great. So, well, you mentioned what you like about the audiences. So, how long has it been since you were last getting to perform there?
I did
Was
the
it pre-pandemic?
Den. No, it was post-pan. I think it was about a year and a half ago. And boy, if there isn't a more perfect stage, that place is incredible. The people who run the club are incredible. I also think
Yeah.
it's fun that it's called the Den, because the bar that I went by that we all started at was called the Lion's Den. So that
Huh.
feels sort of perfect. I
Yeah.
know they set the Den up to be a theater space originally. They pivoted into comedy, but like the comedians there all benefit from like perfect sound, perfect lights. The crowd is right on top of you. And it was some of the best shows of the last tour, and I'm really excited to be going back.
Okay, great. So, in your book, you mentioned a period, I think it was during crashing, where you were busy, but at the same time, you were not like feeling very creative, if I recall, right? It's or maybe I got that wrong. I hope not. But I was just wondering, like during the pandemic, you're coming out of it with this big new special again. I am not for everyone on Netflix, and you're coming out and you're on tour and all this. But how did COVID and the forced kind of downtime, where people couldn't really do anything live, were you active online doing stuff, or how did that affect your creative process those couple of years where everything kind of shut down?
Yeah, that's a good question, man. It was like I was about to film my special that ended up being the special that we just filmed now, that we're talking about. I was about to film it, and then the lockdown happened. And that ended up being, there was a silver lining. Of course, that was rough. But what ended up happening was there was this involuntary gestation period where now I'm like, that's what I should do every time. When I think I have the hour ready, I should really take another year. Because what you're trying to do is, at that point, things start slowly happening. You start doing shows outside. And I started just writing new jokes and trying to bump them out see if I could beat anything that was in the hour and bump it out. Because you couldn't film anything. It wasn't the time for that. So you were just trying to make the act better. And I think that's why I'm Not For Everyone is my favorite special, is because it sort of matured like in an oak barrel. Like it had that second, third rewrite, as opposed to like just maybe two rewrites. There's like 3, 4 rewrites, and really trying to polish it to like a mirror shine. That was I know there was so much loss and devastation from it, but creatively that ended up being like a strange, unexpected gift for me to hit pause involuntarily. And then at the end of the day, I think it made the special a lot stronger. But to answer your question, during the lockdown, I didn't do much. I kept thinking I didn't want to take a break from stand-up. I wanted everyone to take a break from stand-up, and which is a totally different feel. If you take 6 months off from stand-up, but everyone else is still going, you kind of have FOMO. You feel like you're missing out. But if the whole thing shut down, my life was like Little House on the Prairie. I was just hanging out with my family every single day. It was such a gift. I got to be there for my daughter's first steps, for her first words, like just constantly with my family. And a lot of the jokes in I'm Not For Everyone are about what it was like being a dad during the lockdown. Not specifically during the lockdown, but there were moments that, and I sort of shudder to think that I might have missed if I had kept touring, and I might not have been there when some of those things happened.
I don't know if part of this was already covered by what you just said, but I was just curious, like, how did the pandemic's couple of years downtime affect how you saw the world spiritually?
I mean, that's a great question. I think what it forced you to do, to me, spirituality has a lot to do with surrender. And that doesn't just mean surrender to God or anything, or it doesn't just mean that. It means surrender to what's happening. It means saying yes to what is, which is what Richard Rohr says love is. Love is learning to say yes to what is. So here we are in a situation where something that we don't want is being forced upon us. But it was your life. Like I really, take issue when people are like, I lost 2 years of my life. I'm like, no, you didn't. That was your life. And it was the spiritual work of that quiet time was to try and merge with it and try and ease into it and learn to say yes to something that you don't want. You know, that's in the Tao Te Ching. They say the great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. And I think that's really powerful. It's like when you can stop resisting what's happening, what happens is all of that knee-jerk, automatic, clinging desire, attractions, and aversions, they fall away. And what's left, if you can quiet yourself enough, is the peace that passes understanding. It's this non-circumstantial happiness that has nothing to do with your ego getting what it wants or avoiding what it doesn't want. You just sort of dissolve into what is. And I found that to be a really helpful practice. Working with something that you don't want was a very helpful practice for me.
Okay. I'm going to ask a couple of things about being a father, but I just realized that for our listeners and viewers, hopefully a lot of the young ones obviously would know who you are, but if we have any older ones, I want to explain a little bit, if we could put it in a nutshell. Your spiritual quest or journey has been that you were raised, or if you don't mind putting it sort of in a nutshell, if you can just give a general thing and explain what you mean that you are now embracing all sorts of things, but that you're Christ leaning.
Yeah, Christ leaning.
Yeah.
Some people think God created the universe. Some people think nothing created the universe, which is the funniest guess. And the nothing people make fun of the God people. They say God doesn't exist. I'm like, okay, maybe. But you know what definitely doesn't exist? Nothing. That's the defining characteristic of nothing, is that it doesn't exist. So what are we talking about? Either you think it's God, something you can't see, touch, taste, photograph, and science can't prove, or you think it's nothing, something you can't see, touch, taste, photograph, and science can't prove. But I think we can all agree, if your nothing sometimes spontaneously erupts into everything, that's a pretty goddamn magical nothing, you guys. And ask the nothing people, what happens when you die? They'll tell you, nothing. You go into nothing. I'm like, you mean you merge back with your creator? That's heaven.
Yeah. So if we could explain in a nutshell, where you came from spiritually, how you were raised, and where you wound up, now.
Yeah, no, that's a generous question. I was raised evangelical, a non-denominational evangelical. Most of my life, I thought I was going to be a youth pastor. And then when I became a comedian, my mom said close enough, which I thought was funny and very understanding of her. But I took it, I can't really say that my church would identify itself as a fundamentalist church. I don't think they would.
Okay.
I can say that I was hyper literal, very sort of, I don't know how to put it without sounding negative. I don't even mean it negative. I just sort of was like, God said it, that settles it sort of guy. Then I got married when I was 22. And then when I was 28, my wife told me she was having an affair. She was in love with somebody else. And she left. And that really sort of shattered my worldview. Mm-hmm. I always think of the Leonard Cohen quote. He says, the cracks are how the light gets through. So there was this sort of blessing in disguise, this disruption. The last thing that I wanted to happen, I could say all these years later, was exactly what I needed to happen. I think it was Paula Darcy said, I don't know if it's Paula Darcy, but I think it is. She said, first comes the fall, then comes the recovery from the fall. Both are the grace of God. So that's a new idea for me, that the fall itself, the thing you don't want, actually is an act of grace. Meaning, up until that point, I sort of understood God as to be like a protector, meaning like he would keep me safe always. He would stop bad things from happening. I didn't smoke, I didn't drink, I didn't swear, I didn't have sex before I was married. I did all the right things. So I thought that meant I was sort of minted and good, almost like the mafia, like I had been paying the protection money so God would stop them from burning down my bakery. And then when a bad thing happened, as does to all of us, that was very confusing to me, but it ended up being sort of the kick in the pants that I needed to get a little bit more curious and go a little bit deeper in what my understanding of God was. And for a while, I sort of put it on the shelf, and then slowly through a series of, spiritual experiences, I discovered Joseph Campbell, who taught me about metaphor and myth and story. And then I discovered Ram Dass, who for people who don't know, he wrote Be Here Now. And I found Eckhart Tolle, and I started finding all of these sort of, as my parents would think, kind of like woo-woo, new agey things. But the more I got into the nitty-gritty of those teachers, I started to recognize Jesus. I started to see what had been in my own faith that was right in front of my face, that I feel like I was looking past or wasn't overtly taught. So there was this like rescuing. There was the deconstruction, which was essential. I went through my phase of that. But then there was the reconstruction, which I think is so much more interesting and so much more compelling than deconstruction, which most people, especially showbiz people, get stuck in the deconstruction, talking about, well, this contradicts that and this and the historical this and that. And that's all fine and has its place. But I got really lit up the more I started to recognize truth in different places and how they overlapped. And then that didn't just become a belief system or a group I belonged to. That became an active and experiential knowing or being, a new way of sort of being in the world.
Well, okay, so then I don't want people to think either that are unfamiliar with you that it's all about God. It's all about, because you're really, I'd say probably, I was describing it to my partner and my business partner, that I'd say probably 75% of your stuff is goofy stuff about your life in the world.
Yeah.
And then maybe 25% is the interesting spiritual stuff. Is that a good assessment, or how do you balance that out is my question.
If you listen to my podcast, it's probably 20% silly, 80% spiritual. My podcast, you made it weird. But if you look at my stand-up, it's actually probably like 95% silly, 5% deep. I would say that if you look past some of the silly premises, there is a kernel of some perspective. Like I have a joke about how I don't like Waze, the app that takes you around traffic. And that's just a silly joke, but underneath it, there is a message of mindfulness. There's a message of being present, the sacrament of the present moment, as the Catholics might know it. And like surrender and like what we were talking about with COVID. So there's always an outline of some perspective, even if the joke is completely ridiculous. There's usually some concurrent message of self-love or acceptance or whatever it might be. But when it's overt, I would say in my stand-up, it's only about 5% of the time I'm directly talking about faith.
And then you have the book, which it starts out with very funny things, and there's sometimes funny things throughout, but as you get more into how you came, because the sex part is that you grew up with a lot of shame as a fundamentalist, or not, forgive the word.
You can say that.
And then you kind of sowed your oats for a while as you doubted God for a bit. And then now you're back in marriage, and you joke about that in your act now, but you joke about the sex in your marriage, but really the second half, I'd say at least, is about the quest for God, and you're being like mostly serious there as well. I'd say probably the 20-80 silly to serious ratio probably applies there. So
I
so
would
how do
agree.
you how do you it's interesting, how do you decide which part of your career you want to do what with? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? The percentage
Yeah,
wise?
it does. Honestly, I think a lot of art, creativity, and I mean that the art of your life, conversations you have, the friends you have, the way you are in the world. So all that is a creative act. And so much of that is an outpouring of what you're consuming. So like if in my personal life, reading spiritual things, uh, studying that sort of stuff is a huge, huge, huge part of my life. So it just sort of happens, sort of without trying. Meaning, if you're consuming that much, and you sit down to write a joke or a book, it's just going to come out. So that's like the opposite of garbage in, garbage out, I suppose. But like, it's fun having conversations like this because a big part of what I'm trying to do is I'm looking for people like me who like talking about the meaning of life and like talking about faith or spirituality or whatever you want to call it, but then also don't mind a very dirty sex joke from time to time, or talking about this, that might not have anything to do with God or whatever. And I know they exist because that's my fan base, and I know they exist because I'm one of those people. But it's kind of a niche group, you know. I don't think I'm a filthy comic, but like I couldn't perform at my own college. I went to a Christian college. It wouldn't
Yeah.
work. Like it wouldn't pass the standards. And yet I know a lot of beautiful people who love spirituality, love God, whatever you want to say, and also sometimes love just blowing off some steam, laughing at something really silly or dirty or strange, and don't see those things as mutually exclusive. I have friends in the clergy. My own mother doesn't like my comedy because I swear, but I cherish the texts that I get from priests that I love, people in seminaries that I love, all different types that message me and say how much they love my special. And not one of them, and how healing this is to my heart, not one of them goes, I wish you didn't swear. They see not even past it. There's no judgment. They enjoy Pete being his authentic self. And
Yeah.
just as I would argue, just as God would see me, they see something beautiful. They're not going, well, that wouldn't fly at Disneyland. I like who, as Richard Rohr says, the word nice is not once in the New Testament. It doesn't appear once in the New Testament.
Yeah.
I don't know how we steam cleaned. I do have a guess on why we did, but we've sort of reduced faith into just being polite. And don't get me wrong, we're being polite right now. I'm not swearing right now. I have different gears. I don't swear in front of my kids. I don't tell her dirty jokes. So that we have different gears, but like I'm also an adult person, and I like using every tool in my toolbox to delight people, to entertain them, and help them feel a little less alone in the world. And going on stage and just pretending like I'm perfect or that I don't have strange thoughts or strange feelings, I don't see much of a service there. I don't want to be a mascot of piety. I want to be someone who's comfortable in his imperfection, so much so that he invites you to laugh at your own, project it onto me, and laugh at it with me, so we can be a little less scared and a little less alone. Which is very much like, what I always think about, Carl, is the prodigal son. He leaves the house, he squanders his inheritance, he's with the pigs, which for a Jewish man is the lowest of the low. He's working with hogs.
Yeah.
And he's afraid to go home because he thinks his father will disown him. And we all know the story. He goes home and the dad, throws a party. And that to me is so much of faith, is going like, Dad's not mad. To quote Richard Rohr again, he says the essence of faith is to accept that you are accepted. And I think the best way to do that is not to polish it and hide it and compartmentalize it and edit it and trim it and clean it up. It's to present your life as it is and love it and share it and celebrate it and laugh at it and hold it loosely. That I think is a ministry in itself.
No, that's great. So You mentioned in the book something that I thought was really profound. So profound, I put it on my Facebook. But that window to the soul. But I loved your concept of life, and when you have good moments and bad moments, and especially how you can shake off the bad moments by, I mean, get through them by
Yeah,
you started thinking of your life as episodes, like,
yeah,
and then you note the difference between who we really are on our own with our consciousness when we're relating to God, our private thoughts, and then we present ourselves as a character like Pete or Carl to the world, and that's a different thing.
yeah.
And you put it all together, and you said that it helps you think of bad times as
Good
thinking in the way
episodes.
of, hey, what's
Yeah,
going to happen to Pete next? And so I
yeah.
was wondering if you could elaborate on that. I think that's something beautiful that everybody should, frame things that way.
I appreciate that, man. Yeah, that was a little technique. You know, our favorite episodes of TV shows are where things go wrong. And the character has to kind of figure their way out through them or be changed by them or just suffer through them. We love those episodes. But in our own lives, when things go goofy or what we don't want, we resist it so hard. And even knowing that those are often the best stories that we have. You know, I made a TV show about my divorce. That was the best story that I had. But the trick is to try and have that non-personal appreciation for your life situation while it's happening. Again, not just as a thought experiment, but as a way to relieve suffering and say, wow, how's Carl going to get out of this? This is a good episode. Like, this is crazy. I don't know what's going to happen. But I would say that, like, we're talking about soul awareness. You're trying to look at your life from a depersonalized, neutral, loving awareness that you are. And I would even differentiate that from your mind. I think that loving awareness is also the same thing that is audience to your thoughts and your feelings and your emotions. And it's always there. It's the ground of being. It's spacious, it's accepting, it's loving, it's peaceful. That's where peace is found. Peace isn't found from solving your problems. There's always new problems coming down the pipeline. The peace comes from your soul. Peace comes from identifying as your soul and recognizing your true nature. And I think that's at least one of the things Jesus was getting at when he said, be in the world, but not of the world. It's like, yeah, there's your life and there's the things that are happening, but who you really are is that field of awareness within which everything is unfolding. And that awareness is okay. It's peace. Like, peace can exist in your ego for the briefest of moments. You get the ice cream cone, and for 5 seconds you feel fine. But who you really are behind all of that, whether or not you get the ice cream, is always fine. And the trick is to kind of shift your identification from Pete to the awareness that you are.
Oh, I agree. That's great. So I want to ask a couple more things about being a father. I said I'd be jumping back into that. And I was in your book, you speak about your the coming of your daughter when she's in the womb, development, etc. That this you said that we all try to, and you tried to reach out to God throughout your life, but this was God coming to you. And if I did I get that right? I think,
That sounds lovely. I'm like, that's
yeah.
lovely. Did I say
No, that
that?
was basically the idea. But I was listening while driving and all this. So,
Sure.
but I was wondering, if you could elaborate what you see as the spiritual side of being a father, as expecting an infant, having an infant, and now that
Yeah,
she's what, 5 years old, maybe, right?
that's right. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So, like, how it's changed at all?
Well, yeah. When you have a baby, you have something that is you and is your wife and isn't you and isn't your wife, but you love it more than yourself. And it's this great expanding, heart expanding happening in your life. And I think one of my goals as a person is to love people like they're myself. You could say that's the golden rule. But that's a lot easier to do when you start to recognize that the awareness looking out your eyes, Carl, is the same awareness that's looking out my eyes. That I think Jesus was nudging us to the idea that we're all one. We're all thoughts in the mind of God, is a way to put it. So we're all kind of in this same dream experience together. So having a daughter is a great way, a great little cheat. If I want to love and understand you, I can sort of draw upon that unconditional, effortless love that I have for my daughter and imagine, what if Carl was Leela? You know what I mean? Like, how understanding, how loving, how patient would I be if I could really grasp that idea that you're a Leela, that's my daughter, from another family, from another state, but spiritually speaking, the same thing with a different packaging. So a child being biologically linked to me has helped me understand the spiritual link that we all share. And it's just helped me learn how to love. That whenever, and the same is true of my wife. It's like when I'm trying to be more patient or more loving or more understanding, I in my better moments, I remind myself, this is just someone else's Valerie. You know what I mean? Like this is just another Valerie. It's not my wife Valerie, but could you try to see her this person that way and love them like that? So it's helped me to break down some boundaries in my better moments.
Okay. Well, there's one thing I wanted to ask about Catholicism, since that's our show here. That you mentioned in the book something about how you think the Catholic idea of repetitive prayer, I'm assuming you're talking maybe the rosary or something, or how the Mass is always the same format every week. So you were saying that you just saw that as a neat thing because that kind of prayer kind of helps people get in tune with God, like in a unique way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I growing up in the evangelical tradition, our prayers were conversational, and again, there's nothing wrong with that. Go for it. But they were sort of like letters to Santa a little bit, like what you wanted, what you didn't want.
Yeah.
It was more thinking. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm all for it, but it was very similar to what was going on in my mind anyway. I'm always thinking about what I want, what I don't want. I would just sort of bookend it with Dear Jesus, and at the end I'd say Amen, and that made it a prayer, and that sort of set it aside from the rest of my incessant thinking. But when I started to see meditation or prayer or contemplation as a way to silence the mind, to reveal what we're talking about, the essence, the ground of being, the background, the soul, instead of the thoughts that are written on the paper, just the blank paper. And once I started to understand through various experiences that was where what I consider God to be, then, whereas at one point in my life I had sort of looked down on Catholics for doing repetitive prayers or masses that were in Latin or whatever it might be, I started to understand. I started to see it's not to think. You're using the prayer as a vehicle to quiet your thinking mind so you can experience, be still and know that I'm God sort of stuff. But because I grew up in a different tradition, I'm like, how's God going to know what college you want to go to if you don't tell him? And I'm like, it's not really about that, because the events of your life come and go. Those repetitive prayers sink you into what is changeless and consistent, and was there when you were born and will be there when you die. That's spirituality to me is interested in the unchanging element of existence, which is just the I am.
Yeah, well, I just have two more. One little bit substantial, the other very easy. Okay, so you're right now you're going viral with a clip from your fantastic Netflix special. I am not for all people, but it's the God is nothing with an no dash thing riff, and you're talking about believers versus atheists and how they view death. And we're going to play a clip of it before we jump into this part, like in our opening banter. But anything you want to say about that idea? This because people really seem to be engaging with it, loving it.
Yeah, if you listen carefully to that joke, I think it's clear that I'm trying to say we're all in the same boat. We just have different words for what's going on. But I was trying to build some common ground and say that if you think nothing created the world, or you think God created the world, and God is objectless awareness, it is no thing. One of the things that really changed me when I was in basically Bible school, my college, was that the Hebrew Bible has no punctuation. So they would write out God is now here with no punctuation, but that also says God is nowhere. And I'm like, isn't that interesting? It's true, God is no thing. God is nothing. It's not a thing, whatever pronoun you want to use. It's not a thing. In fact, that's kind of the point, is the only way you can talk about it is through symbol or through mystery or metaphor. And the only way you can even get close to knowing it is sort of thoughtlessly, experientially. That's what mysticism is experiential faith, having the experience of an understanding without a rational one necessarily following. So I was trying to say, like, we're all in the same boat. It's either something you call God that you can't see, touch, taste, photograph, and science can't prove, or something you call nothing, something you can't see, touch, taste, photograph, and science can't prove. But then I say, I think we can agree that if one of the things your nothing does is spontaneously erupt into everything, that's a pretty magical nothing. And then what happens when you die? The nothing people will tell you go into nothing. I'm like, you mean you merge back with your creator? I'm like, that's heaven. That's heaven.
Yeah.
You can believe when I say the B word, the joke will still work. But it's like, don't you see, we're all doing our best to understand something that is not an object for you to perceive, touch, taste, photograph, or prove. We're talking about a metaphor for a mystery. We're talking about something that isn't to be understood. It's not like your phone. It's not the desk. It's something, I like what God told Moses in the story. He said, I am that I am. That's nothing. That's not a thing. A burning bush is a symbol for something that's, I'm the breath inside the breath. I'm the love that hung the stars. That was Dante. The other one was Kabir. We can point at it, but at the end of the day, I think some people of faith could use the humility to say, like, we don't know. These are the traditions that point us to the experience, to some sort of merging with that which we don't know but believe in. And I think atheists could benefit from saying, I don't know, but there's still a belief system here, and it's pretty magical. and that's okay. We're all kind of using different language to say something very similar, I think.
Okay. Well, the last thing I want to ask on a little lighter note than all this was, I've always wondered, we don't get to see jokes in the Bible officially, at least, but since Jesus was supposed to be the perfect man, then do you think he told the best jokes ever?
Well, we could unpack whether or not Jesus was a perfect man.
Well,
I know what you're saying. Boy, that's a whole topic. I just got off.
Oh, okay.
No.
I just
got lost. No, I took it too seriously. Did Jesus tell great jokes? I think if you where you go and start talking, people drop what they're doing and follow you. If where you go and you start talking, you have to get on a boat and float out into the sea so you don't get swamped. That sounds like somebody who was probably pretty compelling, not just doing healings and miracles, but somebody that was probably pretty aware of the cosmic joke and helped people lighten up. So I believe that he was funny. I think when he said, you know, you point out the speck in your brother's eye, but you don't see the log in your own eye. That's a pretty funny thing to say. It's 2,000 years later. That's not that fancy, but I bet at the time that was a pretty hot bit.
that was like a sick burn.
Yeah, it was a sick burn. This guy's got a log in his eye, and everyone dies laughing. Yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time, being so generous with your time and thoughts, and we're excited to have you on the show again, and want to remind everybody not only to see Pete if you're in Chicago, or fly in for it to the Den Theater December 8th and 9th, but more importantly, to check out his phenomenal special, I Am Not For Everyone, on Netflix. Thanks a lot,
Thank
Pete.
you, Carl. It's always a pleasure talking to you, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you.
CatholicLaughter.com brings live stand-up comedy shows to your church, fundraiser, or event. For more information or to inquire, go to CatholicLaughter.com and be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram.